Hi, and welcome to one of our experts in our series. I actually saw something that Jake Melton was doing on LinkedIn, and I thought it was really interesting because it ties into the whole Dreams Recycled kind of concept of the idea and how I got it to where it is. And so we're thrilled to have him. He is the best-selling author of Minimalize to Maximize Your Happiness, or in other words, How to Cut the Crap. He is an author, coach, speaker in the mental health field, and he helps leaders and companies address mental health and wellness in the workplace, which is really, really important, right? There's not enough stress put on this. So welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Tiffany. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about how you got into this, because I obviously am not from America. I'm English. And I think one of the biggest things I realized was different about America when I came here is just the sheer amount of stuff humans have.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because what I've heard, at least over in Europe and stuff, is obviously a lot of living spaces are smaller. I've always heard the refrigerators are smaller, and a lot of times they'll go down and buy fresh food, whereas here in America we'll go to a Costco and buy weeks worth of bulk, and we always have tons of storage. And that's from what I've heard, that's what it sounds like. A big difference is in the amount of stuff that we have and we keep around. But for me, being one that speaks on mental health and bringing the awareness into the workplace and into our personal lives and how we can maintain positive levels of mental health and wellness. My story goes back to when I was younger. When I was younger, I was having a lot of these physical tics that would demonstrate themselves as I got older. When I was 16 years old, I was actually diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. And for me, it being 16 years old and diagnosed with something that actually has no cure, that is a neurological disorder, that kind of started my whole path on experiencing what mental health and illness was like. And
because probably at the time you'd probably never heard of it, right?
No, I didn't. I did hear about it, and the only things I heard about it was there were videos out on YouTube with people who were spitting out curse words, and there were a lot of videos making fun of people with Tourette's, and especially those with verbal tics, were sounds, right. But I was diagnosed with motor tics, and so I didn't know anybody that had this. I hadn't really read or seen very much about it. And finding out that I had something like that at 16, when I was, in my opinion, very popular in high school. I had a lot of friends. I was acting, so I was always up on stage. I was always performing. I was also playing sports. But, so having that come into my mind and knowing that I felt broken, and I felt like something was wrong with me or defective.
Well, any differences, right? Every kid I know at my children's school, they all wear Vans, and I say to them, why? And they're like, because everyone else does. You don't want to be different, right? You just, that's a very impressionable age. So I can see how that would be very difficult.
Yeah. And that's something extremely different. Right. So for me, it was just something I struggled with for a long time. I never really expressed my experience. I didn't want people to know about it because it was so different and weird. So I kept it low key for a long time, even with, cousins and even some of, I would say, close friends. I didn't even let them know about it until I got older. Well, as I grew up, I went to college. I met this girl who I fell in love with on the spot. And before we got too serious into dating, it might have been even the second date, I said, hey, I want to tell you something, because I always had a concern I would never get married and have a family because I had Tourette's. Aww. And I said, I have Tourette's syndrome. I just want you to know that. I don't know if that changes anything. And she looked at me like I was crazy and told me that that wasn't anything that was going to stop how she felt, or, that she wanted to spend time with me, whatever. Well, I ended up marrying her, and
that's a lovely story.
Yeah, we have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're beautiful. And, growing up thinking that I would never have a family, let alone a beautiful family, and everything would be okay. Being able to actually have that and come and experience that was just a miracle for me. And I also didn't do very well in school because of this Tourette's growing up. It's hard for me to focus. It was hard for me to concentrate, to even keep things in memory. And I ended up being able to get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. I'm going to go for a PhD at some point. So I was able to overcome that. And in high school,
by the way?
And what?
What subjects in?
My bachelor's was in strategic communications, and my master's was in organizational psychology.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So
that kind of ties into what you do now, right?
It does. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, and, in high school, I actually wanted to be a public speaker. I didn't know if that was the route. I wanted to be an actor or a public speaker, and things obviously changed as I went to college and things like that. But again, a lot of people were wondering how I would ever be a public speaker with Tourette's, because it's, such an evident,
because you have no control over it, right? You don't know when
I don't.
Or could happen, would happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So Tourette's is made up of involuntary tics, motor or vocal, and yeah. So, and with, let me say this too, with Tourette's, and this is where more of this mental health experience comes in. As I got older, I got into college, started a family, started dealing with more and more anxiety and stress in life. I was actually diagnosed with anxiety. I was diagnosed with depression. I was diagnosed with some forms of OCD and ADD as well. So I was really just going through all of the abbreviations that you can go. And
all the acronyms.
All the acronyms, yeah. And for me, I was meeting with a psychiatrist. I was meeting with a psychologist. I met with a neurologist. I was on medication since I was 16 and first diagnosed. I had all these things going on. When I was 14, my dad was diagnosed with a terminal illness, and I'm the oldest of 5 kids. So I was 14. My youngest sister was born 2 months before my dad was diagnosed. And moving forward again, sorry to keep going back and forth between past and
no, it's okay.
Later on, but my dad ended up passing away in 2014, 2 months before we had our little girl, which would have been the first grandchild. And I was the only child not there. I was actually in a different state for the summer. And after that happened, that was the darkest, most difficult time for me ever.
Because loss, right? Loss, grief. It's all very, very difficult to handle anyway. I mean, for the strongest, mentally strongest person on the whole planet, any kind of loss or adversity is so difficult. And obviously losing a parent, a loved one, a child, a sibling is awful.
It is awful. And, we always knew it was going to come. Obviously you don't know what day and what time, but even though we knew it was going to come, you're still never ready for it. And for the longest time, I would find myself at the cemetery a lot. We live close by. I would spend a lot of time there. I was having an extremely difficult time enjoying any parts of life. I was also not doing very well in school at that time. And I went in and talked about some of this with the psychiatrist I was meeting with. And I actually was diagnosed with PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder.
From your passing?
Yes.
Okay.
And I had no idea that was a possibility. I did not, most people think with PTSD, it's war veterans who come back and they've had shell shock or, really, I mean, for me, this was a terrible, terrible experience, but you would think people with PTSD experience even worse. So having that it made a lot of sense to me, and it kind of gave me a little bit more clarity of why I was feeling how I was feeling, along with everything else. But
yeah, because sometimes that's what we need, right? We need validation that what you're feeling is normal, that there's a reason where it's coming from and everything that's going on.
Right. So even though I was really unfamiliar with it, knowing that was causing a lot of how I was feeling gave me a better idea on how I might approach it and try to improve it. And so I was, again, in therapy, taking medication during this time. And right after this happened, I turned on Netflix and I saw the documentary, The Minimalist. Have you seen that?
No, I have seen bits of it. I don't think I've ever sat still enough to watch the whole of it.
yeah, no.
I'm like all over the place. But
oh yeah, no, I don't blame you. I turned it on and I immediately connected. For me, my style has always been very minimalistic, but I didn't ever know that's what it was called or what it was. Yeah. I've always loved living more simply and having less in my life. But coming to terms with this documentary really made me recognize that, hey, you know what, this is really cool. I should look more into this and start applying some of these principles to my life. So I did. And some of the biggest things that I learned from this in this journey in the last 4 or 5 years of going through minimalism is it isn't about living with minimal amounts of physical things. It's not about, not acquiring a lot as far as possessions go, but it's getting rid of anything in your life that isn't making you happy or that isn't helping you progress. So anything that causes you added stress, anger, bitterness, frustration, jealousy, get rid of it, right? And for me, the hardest thing to let go of were some of the relationships that were toxic, or some of those relationships that were I was holding on to and were dragging me, even though life was moving on and I couldn't keep those relationships up anymore. So that, for me, letting go of some of those and letting go of other things in my life and just cutting out the stress and things that were causing added anxiety, that made a bigger difference for me and actually helped me more than the medication and the therapy did.
No, I can believe that. I mean, obviously, you know what we do. We are a divorce community. We help divorcees in a million different ways. And it's one of the philosophies, and like I said at the beginning, why we connected with you, is I think it's just such an important part of the divorce process that if you're going to recycle your life and you're going to move on in a kind of different, healthier, happier path, part of that obviously goes with getting rid of the stuff, getting rid of the people, letting go of the anger, letting go of the jealousy, letting go of the what ifs, which obviously a lot of divorcees struggle with. What if I had done this? What if I was, 10 pounds lighter or $1 million richer? Would someone have left or not left or whatever? And so obviously it's a big part of our philosophy. So what would you tell the divorcees that are watching? Like, how can they practically go about letting go of toxic people?
The first thing I would say is you just have to be patient and know that it takes time. Of course, we'd all like to let them go overnight and just move on. But some of those, especially the ones that mean the most to us, even if we have to let them go, it's going to take time. And we have to be patient with that process. So that's one thing I'd say right off the bat. The other thing is doing it in a way where you don't necessarily have to, especially depending on who it is, if it's a family member, or if it's an ex-spouse, or if it's
it's often a combo. It's often a combo of the ex-spouse, the ex-family, the friends who have not been very supportive. When you're under a lot of duress or adversity, or you're grieving anyway, the last thing you need in your life is any kind of emotional vampires or toxicity. And I think sometimes in our daily life, when everything is going good, we put up with more than we should because we can. But then when we're not in such a good spot, we can't put up with it anymore. But in actual fact, that's a blessing, because if that's the impetus to let go of those people, get rid of them, your life obviously takes on a better kind of tone overall.
Yeah, I agree. And the other idea I had with this is you don't necessarily have to cut the strings fully. You don't necessarily have to just, take out the trash and throw them outside and never talk to them again. There are definitely strategic ways of talking with them less, or, not being in the same places as them. There's things that you can do. Obviously, don't stress yourself out that you're going to, if you run into them in the grocery store, you're like, it's going to be super awkward. You don't know what to do, but just slowly letting go and putting the space between you. And I think eventually and inevitably that will create that barrier, and then you can let go easier at that point.
Well, and it to me anyway, it ties into setting the boundaries for everyone, right?
Yep.
which also maybe when everything is going good is not so important, but when you're completely overwhelmed with the divorce process, feelings of loss and grief, it really is imperative that you set up those boundaries for even the people that you're going to keep in your life, not unless the ones that you're going to get rid of.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
So what's the other parts of your philosophy? So number one, you think it's healthiest to kind of let these people go, those toxic people go slowly away, minimize their effect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I feel for me, and this has been the case for a lot of people I know as well. It's for those that are really attached to relationships, that really can put a damaging, damper on your emotional state and your mental capabilities. So that's one of the biggest things. Another one is obviously letting go of the physical clutter. So if you're living in a house or you're working in an office space that just has clutter everywhere, even if you think it's organized clutter, the more that you have, the more overwhelmed your mind psychologically can be. And so if you're working or you're living in a space that's clear of this, your mind is also going to be clear of this. And for me, that's definitely been my experience. If you think about, if you just closed your eyes right now and thought about a desk with papers all over it and cups everywhere, and it's dusty, and working at that desk as opposed to a clear desk, you got a nice plant or flower in the corner, maybe a picture, and it's wiped clean of dust. That's going to affect the way you focus and work. And
absolutely. I can't. Over time, I'm that person that I can't even sit on the sofa if it's like there's mess in the room, because I've kind of trained myself, and I don't know how much you know about my story, so I'm going to bore you for a second.
No, you're not. No, I want to hear it. Good.
So my story started because I couldn't sell my own engagement ring, and so I had this dream and I couldn't sell it. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to sell my ring and everyone else's stuff from their divorce on my website, which is obviously what I did. But what I did in real life is, before this, and I didn't even know what I was doing, I just had this overwhelming urge. I was sitting in my house. It was the same house that I'd been married in for 15 years. It was full of all the furniture, all the paintings, all the everything else, the objet d'art and all the other junk you collect, and everything had some kind of memory of my old life, my ex, my previous marriage. And I remember just being like, I have to get all of this out of my house, right? I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just felt like there was something really powerful about that. Like not sitting in the ashes and the relics of your, past relationship or failed marriage, or, for people even worse, if it was abusive or whatever. Because I really do believe that things hold thoughts, right?
I agree.
If you're looking at a painting and you got that painting on, at your honeymoon on Vienna, subconsciously, every time you walk past that painting, you're being reminded of it. And so I went the extreme route, and I got the biggest dumpster you've ever seen on the planet. And I put it outside my house, and I spent probably a month, and I threw away almost everything I could except for the things kids needed.
Wow.
And it was so empowering to me that I could let go on a physical way, because, we talked about kind of letting people out of your life, and, we're all very kind of emotional. We say like, oh, just let it go, move on, forgive, whatever. But it's a practical way that everyone on the planet can do. They physically have the power to take something that doesn't hold good memories, that, like you said, doesn't bring you happiness, doesn't bring you joy, take it to the dumpster, take it to the trash, Goodwill, and of course, dreamsrecycled.com. And that kind of is really what it's about. It's the one thing that we all hold power over doing, is letting go of physical items.
Yeah. As you said, extremely empowering and freeing. That's really cool. I'm proud of you for doing that. And, some of those things can be extremely hard to let go of. But in a case where it's actually, maybe it is something that you don't necessarily need, but it does make you happy, or it does bring about good memories. People will ask me, do I keep this even though it's taking up space or I'm not using it, but it still makes me happy? And I actually tell them yes. Most minimalists will probably say no, but I say yes. And that may be because, my dad passed away, and I've kept things of his or things he gave me that may just be sitting around, but they're things that, if I threw them away, I can never get them back if I ever wanted them again. And
Right.
so I've always, told people the same thing. If it means something to you, then keep it. And
Well, and now that I'm older and wiser, it's also not particularly smart to throw away valuable things when you could sell them.
right.
So
Which,
that I figured out also.
On Dreams Recycled, are those items available for purchase or giveaway? Or okay.
Yeah, they're available for purchase, and it doesn't even matter how much money it is. If you're getting rid of them and you make some money, and that money you can go to new dreams, it's like win-win-win, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody like a divorcee who really is attached to things? I mean, it like no rhyme or reason to it, but some people's personality is they just really kind of have a lot of things. I know you probably know people. I know people, you walk into their house and you're like, good Lord, like, where did all this stuff come from?
Yeah.
And so how do they even start that process? What do they pick and choose first, or what should they be thinking?
That's a really good question. Let's see, I had a couple thoughts. The first thing, and this is a strategy I like to use with people, and it's I call it different things, but it's a yes, no, and maybe self-assessment. If you're going through things in your home, let's say, like, I'll just grab this. I have this plant, okay, and let's say I bought this with my ex-spouse, and it brings about good memories, even though I have bad memories of our relationship, but it brings about good memories. So I actually want to keep it. What I usually say is, if your initial response or answer to whether or not you should keep something, if it's a yes, it's a yes.
Okay.
If it's a no, it's a no.
Right.
If it's a maybe, it's a no.
Okay. That's a really good way of looking at it, right? Because
if you pick this up and think, I don't know if I want it, I kind of do, it's a no. And then you move on. If it's not 100% yes, if you're not sure, then it's a no. It's yes or no.
Yeah.
So that's one strategy I'd use.
No, and I mean, I think that's powerful too, right? Because if you don't have instantly powerful yes to it, that probably tells you everything you need to know. It's like, most of the advice I give people about divorce, if they ask me the question, they usually already know the answer, right?
Yeah, totally. They do.
So that's their mind kind of saying, okay, there's something not quite right about that item, so I should.
So another thing, sorry.
It's okay.
Are you still there? My phone had like the low battery thing, but I think we're good.
Okay.
The other thing I tell people to do is just take a picture of the item. So I was going through my mom's storage unit, because she had a storage unit she was spending a ton of money on. And I was helping her clear everything out of there. And of course, we went back and found all my baby stuff, like stuffed animals from when I was a baby, and blankets and clothes. And she's kept them for 30 years. But for me, I just said, you know what, like this, I know it means a lot to you. I don't necessarily remember it, but this is taking up space. It's not something I'm going to carry around with me. So I just decided to take pictures of it, and I took different dimensions of the pictures, so I kind of flipped the item around so I can see the whole thing. And, if I ever want to remember, then I have a picture of it. I'd rather, I'm not fond of digital clutter per se, but I'd rather have a picture than a physical item laying around. It's easier to manage and kind of put away. So that's another thing, is take a picture of it and then get rid of the item itself, and you still have a memory of it.
Well, I love that one. So nothing to do with divorce, just to do with life. And you have little children, so you're in this phase and going to be more in this phase shortly. I mean, I can't even tell you how many pieces of paper I have with macaroni stuck on them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, preschool, kindergarten, whatever. And somebody actually told me that way before my divorce. They were like, oh, no, we don't keep everything. You know, like the mom at school who's good at everything. It was one of those
Yeah.
moms.
Yeah.
And she said, just take a picture of them all. And that's what I've done. And, you know, instead of having, you know, totes and great big things of paper, because also paper doesn't really like live very long, does it? Like it's gross, especially in Florida anyway. And so that's what I've done. So that's a really good idea, though. I've never thought of doing it with objects too, but that makes sense, right? If you're not sure, you know you had it, you have a picture of it, and let it go.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, so how do you work with a lot of leaders, and you help them kind of through mental illness, etc. And how does that play into the getting rid of your stuff? Like, what, besides the fact that you said earlier, you said like it helps you think clearer, but is there like a bigger picture to that somehow?
Yeah, of course. And with mental health, this is a huge part of the message I share is right now, the World Health Organization estimates that there's $1 trillion lost each year in productivity due to depression and anxiety in the workplace. $1 trillion.
Wow. That's crazy.
So I take this message of mental health and illness and leadership and how, you know, we can make the organizations better and minimalism and bring it to the fact that the more that we have to deal with, the more we're wasting our time on, the more distractions that we have. If, you know, the more we let things overwhelm us and burden us and stress us out and keep us anxious and upset or frustrated, and any of that, that's going to affect our productivity. That's going to affect our engagement in the workplace. That's going to affect overall sales or revenue and culture for the whole company. So it all begins with the individual, right? If we have a bunch of individuals that are all dealing with a bunch of crap in their lives, that's going to affect the entire organization. That's going to affect the leaders. Or if you have a leader coming in who's dealing with all this junk and they can't keep their life in order, they can't keep their desk in order, their business in order, that's going to affect everything, every outcome of the business and especially performance, everything. So that's where I tie it into. If you want to be the most productive, if you want to perform, you know, at your peak level, you want to reach your best performance, you want to be the most focused, most engaged, you want to build a supportive culture, then you need to take care of things on your own terms first. That way you can help others do the same, and then the entire organization or business thrives. So
Which makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
Because you look at the kind of stressful lives we all live anyway. And to me, it's like, you know, a lot of us don't realize it, be walking around on, you know, borderline breaking point. You're not really sure, right? Yeah. There's this kind of like, you know, while everything's okay, it's okay. And I think that's why, you know, there's so much situational depression on top of clinical depression. And, you know, whether it's like you were saying about, you know, your father passing or people getting divorced or losing a job or whatever it is. And so we really are a kind of, you know, society of people that we're really, really good at an awful lot of things, but managing our stress is not one of them.
Nope. It's definitely not.
No. And anything that kind of is change, takes you off the path that you thought you were on, you know, affects your psyche in any way, can often kind of put you in this state. But as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, how great would it be if actually all these people who are walking around kind of on the brink that you don't know you're on the brink, you know, if they kind of went with the minimalistic approach and with the healthiest they could be mentally and the strongest, they'd probably be in a much better position when or if adversity struck, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I wish I would have found it before, because not that it would have, I don't know, not to say it would have been easier necessarily, but I think it would have been different. Mm-hmm. If I would have been using some of these principles before I had lost my dad or before I was diagnosed with these things. And yeah, I think it would have a good, amazing impact.
So as somebody who has had a lot of adversity in their life, what do you think is something that you could tell people who are going through adversity now? Like, what are the 3 things that they should focus on most?
The 3 things they need to focus on most. The first one that comes to mind is that it's okay to feel the way you feel when something happens.
That's very important, isn't it?
Yeah. So, if you lose a job, I've also lost jobs on multiple occasions. If you lose a person in your life, whether it's to death or divorce, or somebody last night found out my youngest sister, her best friend's moving out of state, and she was distraught and crying for hours last night. It's to understand that you're human and it's okay to have the reactions and the emotions that you feel.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets to a point where you can't let that go and you stay in that low place for a long time, that's when it becomes an issue. But to say, if you lose somebody in your life, that you should overcome it and be more powerful right away and things like that, that's just not the human way of reacting. And I don't think it's healthy to react that way and just move on from whatever it is. So I think taking that time to whatever it is, if it's grieving, if it's letting go, if it's just feeling what you're feeling, like just let that happen. The next thing is to find ways to obviously get through that. So take the time, and then once you feel like you've taken that time, before it drags on too long and keeps you, when you start noticing your life is kind of on hold and you need to move forward, then go out and find things that will actually help you get out of that state. Whether it's, maybe you do need to go into a doctor and get tested. Maybe you have to have medication. Maybe you find meditation. Maybe you find minimalism or other essentialism or any of these other philosophies. Maybe you just need to take more time for you. Maybe you need to play an instrument. You need to start a different hobby, whatever it is. Do something like that. And then the third is to, I would say, be ready at some point to share your story, because whatever it is you're going through, it's going to be an opportunity for you when you do overcome it or get through it. Sometimes you don't overcome it, you just get through it. It's going to be an opportunity for you to share with other people who are going through the same things, or people who will be going through the same things. So off the top of my head, those are the three things.
No, and they're great, right? They're all so important. It's important to acknowledge that you don't, that you are grieving, and that's important obviously to heal through that. And then, as you said at the very last one, it's really important that you're ready to share your story, because if you're not ready to share your story, you're probably not there yet, and you probably need to do some more work on that. But I share my story continuously, and I know you do too. And I think people forget that how healing that actually is. Like, I'd like to say I'm a saint and I just do it because I love everyone else. But it's powerful within yourself also, right? That you're helping other people, and it goes like hand in hand with that by helping other people, you're helping yourself even more.
It's powerful. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell us where we can find your book.
You can find my book on Amazon. It's available on all the Amazon markets. There's, I don't know, however many there are, 10, 12, 15. They are available on Amazon all over the world. I do have my original book, Minimalize to Maximize Your Happiness, Cut the Crap, available there on Amazon. I also have a workbook edition, which is definitely more reflective. There's opportunities in there for exercises, list making, goal setting. That's also available on Amazon. You can also find my book on my website, Jake, B as in boy, Melton.com. Those are the places you'll find my book.
The workbook sounds fabulous, because I'm a big person on like practical actionary things. So that workbook sounds really good for the divorce community.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I've received a lot of good feedback on it, definitely, because it's more interactive. Yeah. And people have seemed to really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Well, you've been amazing. What a great guest you are. And thank you so much. So where else can they find you? Can they find you on social media, or where?
They can, find me on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, especially. That's where I probably have the biggest presence, is on LinkedIn. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you just search Jake Melton. I'm sure I'll pop up, and we'll put the links down below for the exact, URLs.
We'll link it back to the book.
Yeah. Or just my website again, jakebmelton.com.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jake. You've been lovely.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm glad to be here.
You're very inspirational. I'm sure a lot of people found your story riveting and very hopeful. And so thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing.
So are you, by the way.
Well, thank
You are
you.
very inspiring and very motivating as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we will keep up with you and let us know when you have a new book out. We'll be sure to have you back.
You got it. Sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jake.